back for my day. Well, not daily, but I'm trying to do as many live streams as possible. I feel bad that y'all can see my messy ass house, or bedroom, I should say, behind me. Trying to get this thing. Okay, there we go. Hey y'all, so today I'm just getting ready to go hang out with a friend outside for just a little while. So I'm trying to do a very just basic makeup look, and it's finally warm here in Kalamazoo. It's like, I think it's gonna be 75 today, so I don't want to put too much makeup on either because it's you know, gonna be, I'm gonna be sweating. But I want to talk about complex PTSD. I actually have my son's phone because there were some things I saw today that just like really hit me. So I have talked about on this channel before how I have diagnosed with complex PTSD, and I think I was diagnosed in 2018. So it's been a while. It was while I was in the middle of a marriage that was, domestic violence, specifically narcissistic abuse and verbal abuse. And I was in the height of my trauma and went to a therapist and was like, I'm not surviving. What is going on? I had actually never heard of complex PTSD. I'd only ever heard of PTSD. And like a lot of people, I just assumed that was what people got when they came back from war, like, hello. So yeah, so I didn't really know a lot about complex PTSD when I got diagnosed. I do have the story up on my channel. I have a six-part series on what I went through with narcissistic abuse and verbal abuse. So if you're interested in knowing kind of the whole shebang. But then a few years ago, I think not last year, but the year before, I did a YouTube video on how I healed myself from complex PTSD. Unfortunately, I spoke too soon. I was doing better. I was healing. I got EMDR therapy. I actually also have a whole EMDR series up on my channel because EMDR like really, really, really changed my life. Really brought so much healing. So anyway, so because of that, because I was feeling happy at that time, I was in a new relationship when I filmed that video. So I was feeling happy, I was feeling contented, I was feeling stable. My symptoms were subsiding. I think I was also at that time on an antidepressant, so everything was being managed. But what I realized is that I did speak a little bit too soon. So anyway, what I saw today was from an on Instagram post from the holistic psychologist, who, if you're not following her on IG and you're dealing with issues of complex PTSD, you might want to. But one of the things she said is memory issues, being spaced out, detached from life can be symptoms of complex PTSD. And she says, you're not crazy. It's not in your head. So memory issues have been a huge issue for me. You can probably sum all those up: memory issues, being spaced out, being detached from life, as executive dysfunction is another way that people can identify that they have complex PTSD. If you just can't function in life, it becomes really hard to maintain work. It becomes really hard to maintain your home, to maintain any sort of organization. Being completely spaced out, disassociating a lot. So like there was a time where things were so bad with me when I was in the really, really thick of complex PTSD, before I even knew what was going on. The way I disassociated was being on my phone all the time, which I know a lot of people do anyway. But thank you. Appreciate that. I lost my point. Oh yeah, but being detached just from life in general, usually that looks like, some people can mistake that for depression if you just don't have any motivation to do the things you usually do. So then she says, an explanation of complex PTSD, which, just as a refresh or recap for here, complex PTSD is developed when you experience a series of traumatic events over time, whereas PTSD is usually a single event based kind of thing. So like if you saw someone you love get murdered, or you were in a very horrific car accident, people who get PTSD, you know, were involved in an earthquake, watched their house burn down, or were, you'd love to chat. I don't even know who you are. I don't even know who you are. And this is distracting me right now. Anyway, so yeah, PTSD is usually single event based. And complex PTSD is something like, you know, what kids developed, which I believe is true for me too, as a result of a traumatic childhood where you're experiencing so many traumas. If you have an abusive parent, which I had an abusive father, or, you know, poverty actually is another way that people get complex PTSD, because you're experiencing trauma over time. Anyway, oh, she gives some examples here. I missed it. So unpredictable or chaotic environments, that's domestic violence. Financial insecurity, like I said, poverty. Harsh punishments, abusive parents who spank, whip, all sorts of that kind of stuff. Witnessing dysfunctional or violent relationships, that's also a thing. Witness violence is also a thing. If you witness someone be violent, like if you're, you know, a teenager and you witness your dad beating your mom, you're going to develop complex PTSD, even if they never beat you. Parentification, so if your parent makes you the parent, which is something I dealt with my own mom. As a, my mom had, she had, what's the word I'm looking for? Wow, I can't think of it right now. She had schizophrenia, but that's not the word I'm missing. Paranoid. She had paranoid schizophrenia. And that was a big part of the trauma I endured with her. And then emotional neglect, which I think is in part how I developed complex PTSD in my own abusive marriage. So what she says, complex trauma activates our internal threat mode. Threat mode makes us extremely hypervigilant. It makes us aware of every little change in mood, every little facial expression, and highly, highly anxious. I don't think I was as anxious of a person. When I'm putting a tiny amount of this on here to color correct. No, it looks crazy, but anyway, I don't think I did, before I was in a situation with domestic violence, I do not think I was nearly as anxious as I have been since then. And that was, for me, that relationship started in 2015. And ever since then, so it's been 8 years, well, really since 2016 when the abuse really started. So it's been about 7 years of feeling like a highly, highly, highly anxious person, which I think is a result of the complex PTSD. Threat mode also makes us feel disassociated, spaced out, shut down, numb, frozen, in a freeze state, and depressed, which I can definitely attest to. The amount of times, especially in this last 6 months or 7 months since life has become so much more challenging, has been crazy, that I have felt completely shut down, completely unable to do things I even love, even doing this right here. So reach out to me privately for what you want to reach out to me privately for. You can email me if you would like. My email is on my about section, and that's true for anybody on here. You can always email me if you have anything that you want to talk to me about. I do not do narcissistic abuse coaching anymore because I found it was too triggering for me, which let me know I was not healed enough to continue doing coaching. But I would like to do it again sometime. But somebody just emailed me recently about doing verbal abuse coaching, because I have a whole series on my channel about what verbal abuse is, because verbal abuse is a very distinct and separate kind of abuse that's often mistaken. So I will do verbal abuse coaching if somebody really wanted that, but that's it. I don't do narcissistic abuse coaching or any other kind of coaching. But all that to say, if you want to reach out to me, you can always email me at grace@outheretryingtosurvive.com. So that is always an option if you would like to reach out. But anyway, so threat mode makes us hypervigilant and disassociated, spaced out, shut down, numb, frozen, and depressed. And a lot of times I think people don't know they have complex PTSD in part because they just see that like lack of interest in what they love, feeling spaced out, disassociating, executive dysfunction, unable to organize, unable to clean, feeling depressed, feeling anxious. They just see that as like, oh, I'm just depressed, without putting together like all these other things. I think especially the hypervigilance. And yes, if you've been watching my live streams, you know that my this is my makeup from last summer when I was tan, and I'm just trying to ride it out until it gets till I get tan again, because it is the NARS. NARS is expensive foundation, that's all I gotta say. So I'm riding this out, even though it is clearly darker, but I don't care. I really don't care. Anyway, so let me go back to it. So after threat mode, I just thought this was such a helpful thing. So symptoms of complex PTSD, and I have had literally every single one of these. Issues with self-regulation, which self-regulation is our ability to handle our emotions in the moment, especially when they're overwhelming, without like literally going crazy and doing crazy things. And I hate to use the word crazy because I know anybody with mental health issues, which I have a plethora, does not ever want to hear that they're crazy, but I feel like that's kind of the best way of saying it. Like if you can't self-regulate without doing poor and bad behaviors and not taking care of yourself, like it's a symptom of complex PTSD. Of course, it could be other things too. Low frustration tolerance. So if you find, I think we see this a lot more with, I hate to say this because I don't want somebody to be like, oh my God, you hate men. I don't. But I think with men, we see this a lot more, like the low frustration just comes out in so much violence. And not that women are violent and women show our frustration, but the way y'all do has further implications. Very easily dysregulated. So whereas if you get in, like if two people get into a car accident, the person with complex PTSD is going to be the one that's looking like, oh my God, you know, the person that's having a much more stronger response, and much more dysregulated, and unable to handle like a very stressful event, not necessarily a car accident, but high anxiety, like I mentioned, is another big symptom of complex PTSD. If you have labeled yourself with anxiety issues, or you're like, oh, I just have anxiety, or I just feel anxious all the time, that could be a symptom of complex PTSD. Emotional flashbacks, high reactivity, and what people call overreactions, emotional flashbacks, looping thoughts, brooding thoughts. So like if you cannot let go, especially if you feel like you cannot let go of a traumatic event that happened, and you just keep looping it, it's just on loop in your mind, even if it's just something someone said. This is something I talked a lot about in my videos about a verbal abuse, because one of the facets of the verbal abuse is that they say such cruel, malicious things intentionally, so your brain just can't stop thinking about it, because you're trying to make sense of it, especially when someone's saying something maliciously evil to you. Like one time, to give you an example of something that looped in my head for I think over a year, was I was looking into trying to find out if my husband at the time, if he was cheating on me, and I brought up something to him, and he said, I hope this information torments you. I hope it tortures you. I hope you rot. I hope you like emotionally rot. And he said that on the phone, and I was just like, you know, obviously that's something he said with intent to malign, an intentional maliciousness. And this is an example of like stuff like that, like constant malicious intent communication can cause complex PTSD. But a symptom of that is if you continue to have flashbacks about it. And like that moment played in my head and hurt my feelings for like over a year. Like I remember after a year or so, I just was like, I have got to just take that out of my head and just refuse to think about it anymore, because it was just bothering me so much. But that's because that was complex PTSD. Another one is high reactivity and overreactions. I've talked about this a lot with me, but I just want to bring it up again to normalize it in case there's anyone else out there who struggles with this. But like, I have the biggest overreactions in movies, especially my startle reflex. Movies, TV, my startle reflex. If something like is like comes by, if somebody walks by and I'm not expecting them, I'm gonna scream. if something startles me on a TV or a movie, I'm going to scream. If if I'm in the car and somebody comes up to my window, I'm going to scream. Like, it's literally all this stuff. Overreacting, complete and utter overreactions. When anybody wakes me up, even if it's fairly gentle, I'm probably going to scream. My startle reflex is really jarring. I would say of any complex PTSD symptom I've ever had in my life, it's been this, and it's the most difficult for people to understand how that can be a result of trauma. I really want to brush, but I don't know if I have a blush brush. I'm just going to use my fingers because my makeup station is all disorganized. Anyway, this is the hardest one for people to understand because it just feels like you're overreacting because you're a drama queen. And it's not that, y'all. I'm not a drama queen. Well, maybe I am a drama queen, like in a different way, like by personality. But like me overreacting through screams and startled and jumping and like all of that, like it's involuntary. And there's so many times I've had to tell people it's involuntary. And I've brought this up before, but like it has actually impacted me in dating too, because of how much people, how scared I get when an alarm clock goes off. I don't tend to sleep in an alarm clock because it scares me half to effing death. And yeah, there was a guy I dated not that long ago who was like, I think you've given me PTSD from how you respond when my alarm clock goes off. So we had to come up with a whole system for how to deal with it, because it was a big thing. It was a big thing. Like one time I really scared, like his alarm clock went off and I shot up and screamed really loud. And he, was like really scared, like thinking maybe somebody's in here, maybe she's getting murdered. Like his mind went to like, no one would scream like that over an alarm clock. And he got really scared. Like he woke up really, really scared and angry. Not, he wasn't angry at me. Like he wasn't inappropriately, he didn't do anything or say anything inappropriate, but I could tell that it was just a lot for him. And I tried to explain to him, like, this is involuntary, bro. Like, I'm not trying to do this on purpose. Like my body responds this way. That's that hypervigilance. It's the overreaction. It's the dysregulated emotions. It's a lot of that. Okay, so some of the other symptoms of complex PTSD: being spaced out and forgetful, misplacing things, losing track of time, and disassociated post-traumatic shock. Whew, y'all, when I read this today, because I put this on my son's phone, and when I read this today, it just was such a reminder, like, I'm not through complex PTSD as much as I want to think that I am, but being spaced out and forgetful is another thing. Like, actually, my therapist said that sometimes people who have been through trauma, who don't think it's complex PTSD, will think they have ADHD. And that was a big discussion that I've been having with him lately, because I'm like, I really, really think that I might be, having ADHD, and he can't actually diagnose it. I need to go to someone who can actually diagnose. But he's like, I don't know if it's that or the complex PTSD. I have since looked into it and think I do have ADHD. But however, you could genuinely have complex PTSD and not think that that's what you have. Forgetfulness, misplacing things, that's always kind of been a function of my life, which I think is ADHD related. But I also wonder if it's exasperated. Oh, somebody was just walking by my window. This is my bedroom window right here. If it's exasperated by complex PTSD, because the way that I have lost things, y'all, in this past year, I've had a very, very, very challenging 12 months. And woo, yes, all of that. And losing track of time. Let me know in the comments how you have lost track of time. I'm ashamed to admit, like, the amount of time that I have spent sometimes just playing Spider Solitaire, which is like my favorite game on my phone, or just mindlessly scrolling the internet, not paying attention, and how that has just really affected me way too much. Some more symptoms of complex PTSD, a feeling of being broken, flawed, or unacceptable. I think it's such a sad thing, because it's how the grief turns inward. But if you've ever felt like you're just a broken person, or you are a completely unacceptable human, everyone else is okay, but for some reason you're not, all those are symptoms of complex PTSD. And sometimes, honestly, it's comforting. It can be really, really comforting to just know that it's not just you, boo. It's not, first of all, you're not the only one thinking that way. Second of all, you're not inherently broken. You're not flawed or an unacceptable human. And especially if you have all these other symptoms, like, it is worth it, in my opinion, to see if you can get a complex PTSD diagnosis. I mean, if you clicked on this, you maybe already have one, or, you know, are already thinking about all of this. I would definitely recommend looking into it, especially those feelings of brokenness. That's something I grew up all my life with, thinking something was wrong with me. As I've mentioned before, I grew up in a very traumatic childhood. I have a very high ACE score because I had lots of different kinds of trauma. Experienced a lot of verbal abuse from an older brother who called me the stupid little N-word a lot. He was white, by the way, and I am black. So that's a whole other story. But anyway, I know that my traumatic childhood gave me complex PTSD, and that I just was walking around not knowing how to help myself or deal with what I was dealing with in my entirety of my teen years, as my mom was getting increasingly more ill with schizophrenia. So I literally thought all the time that I was an actual unacceptable human. Literally thought all the time something is inherently wrong with me, even though I'm trying to be a good human, even though I'm trying to live my life in a way that doesn't, like, intentionally hurt or harm people. It was, yeah, that's a really, really sad part of this particular mental illness, because it lies to you. So if you're feeling this way, just know that your complex PTSD is lying to you. You're not a flawed, broken, or unacceptable human, and neither am I. And I've done a lot of work. A lot of the healing work that I've done is about, like, learning to accept myself for who I am, and really learning to love myself. That's why I decided to redirect this channel towards self-love and really, really focus on how to love myself and how to help other people love themselves. So hear me loud and clear. You are an acceptable human. Another symptom of complex PTSD is mood swings. She says poor vagal tone. I don't know exactly what that means. I'll be honest with you. I have heard a lot of people talk about the vagus nerve and the need to heal the vagus nerve if you have trauma. I got a book about it on my Kindle, haven't read it. So I don't know what she's talking about, but I do know about mood swings. And I feel them often, and I work very hard at self-regulation. That's one of the things that I've picked up, from being, from knowing that I have complex PTSD, is learning how to regulate my moods, especially when they get to going crazy. It's still really, really challenging though, like really, really, really challenging to do, even though I know all this stuff and I have the books and I have the, I have everything I need. A tough inner critic is another symptom of complex PTSD. So if you find yourself judging yourself very harshly, another way people say that shows is with perfectionism, which I have noticed myself even with this YouTube channel. I've noticed that I can get really perfectionistic about stuff, and it's like, there's really no need to do that. This is just not the environment where you should be like highly overly perfectionistic, unless you're like, I don't know. I just have noticed I've been sometimes I will spend way too long on a certain video, and it's like, why are you doing that? Why are you doing it? Anyway, memory issues is another one of complex PTSD, and it's definitely something I can say that I have struggled with. And, it's hard to know sometimes, like, if it's age. Like, I think part of it is, well, I am just aging. And I do have 3 kids, and, when you're juggling a lot, I'm a single mom and all that. So So it makes sense that I would have memory issues, but they have been particularly bad since I was diagnosed with, you sent the email, okay, with complex PTSD. This says here, complex PTSD develops from a lack of autonomy and an overall feeling of helplessness. And so one of the things that I read when I started learning, when I realized that I had complex PTSD, one of the things that I read was that the more dependent you are on someone, especially in situations of abuse, the more extreme and excessive the complex PTSD is going to be on you. So for example, if you're a child and you're enduring trauma, you're feeling helpless, right? Because even if you don't know you're feeling that as a child, because these people who are abusing you are your only means for survival. Or let's say you can't get away. You know, like I have a friend who has it. She was an orphan. She was being bopped around to all these different foster houses and couldn't get away, couldn't get out of the system. There was no hope. So it led to feelings of helplessness. I think that part of the reason why my marriage to my ex narcissistically, verbally abusive husband, I think why the complex PTSD was so bad, because it was bad for a while, y'all. I think that why that was so bad and why the trauma bonding that I experienced was so intense, because I experienced really, really intense trauma bonds. Like even more when I was doing coaching, narcissistic abuse coaching, even worse than a lot of the women I was coaching. It was, I mean, I was, coming out of it, but I have realized that some people experience this really intensely. It depends on the intensity of the abuse, but it also depends on the intensity of the dependence. So for example, I'll give you a explanation of like why it was so bad for me, in part. So when I was married to my ex, I had, very little contact with my mom, obviously, because my mom is sick. My father is dead. I don't really have family of origin like that I'm connected to. Oh my God, I'm messing up my eyes because I don't usually do this and talk. But anyway, so, and I had 2 kids from a previous marriage. And when I got pregnant, I got so sick. I had just lost a job because they went out of business. My job had went out of business and I was really sick. I was having a hard time getting another job even because we just got married and my pregnancy was, I had really bad hyperemesis, which is where you throw up all the time. So anyway, I was completely dependent on him financially in every way. And without him, I would have, like, let's say I was like, oh, you're treating me terrible, I'm leaving. No job, no family, nowhere to go. 2 kids from a previous marriage, so I would have lost custody of them. No money, no savings, no nothing. So my dependence on him was thorough. And also my dependence on him was really, really thorough too, because at that time I didn't have a lot of community. I really didn't have a lot of community at all. So in the city I was living in part because when I got divorced the first time from my older kid's dad, you know how people take sides when people divorce. So anyway, all that to say, if you are very dependent on someone who's been abusive to you, chances are that complex PTSD is going to have a greater chokehold. It activates more things in your body. And so I'm really glad she brought that up. But the lack of autonomy also is a function of abusive marriages. If somebody's making you feel like you ain't shit, you ain't worthy, there's nothing good about you, all of that stuff, that's going to lead to a lack of autonomy. That's why abusers do that. They try to tear you down so that you think nobody else wants you, that you won't be okay without them. So you have no autonomy. You're completely dependent on them. And, as a result, what happens? Then you can't leave, or you don't want to leave, or you're too trauma bonded to leave, which is what happened to me for way too long before I just realized, like, I don't even care if I'm poor. I just got to get out of here. Like, this is just insane. I don't even care. I have to leave this marriage. So it took me, like a lot of women in domestic violence situations, it took me, 7, 8 attempts before I finally got out. So she said, moving towards healing, some of the keys for healing. Oh, I forgot I had something else, but it's in the other room. So I'll just wait. But anyway, she says some of the keys for healing are: number 1, practicing boundaries, learning boundaries. I will, when I'm done with this, add the boundaries book by, oh shoot, I can't remember his name. But the guy who wrote the book on boundaries, Boundaries is a great book. He also has like a boundary for kids, boundary for marriage, boundaries for teens. I have not read all those, but I have read the main book. So if you are very new, if you have a lot of trauma, if you have issues with dating, if you've been through divorce, if you have any problem in your life with your spouse, your parent, your children, whatever, I highly suggest you read the Boundaries book. It's kind of one of those like basic 101 how to be a human, is you just have to have boundaries. And for whatever reason, as humans, because everything has gotten effed up, having boundaries is really easy to have, to violate for yourself. Like, even if I'm uncomfortable, I've had such a hard time with boundaries. Like, I have a tattoo that I don't want because I have such a hard time with boundaries, because I was having a hard time telling the tattoo artist, that's not the one I want. Y'all, like, that's ridiculous. Like, this, I was paying for a service that lives on my body right now. And I was in such a bad place that I was afraid to tell the ninja I didn't even want that specific tattoo. So needless to say, I have struggled with boundaries, and I'm not surprised for someone who routinely had my boundaries violated in my own home by literally every adult in my home. My mom, my dad, my brother, not my sisters so much, but yes, it's very easy to do, especially if all your boundaries are violated. But if you are a domestic violence victim, I highly suggest you read that book. I will put it in there. I will put it in the description box after this is done and up. Another key thing for healing is learning to say no. You would not think that this is such a hard thing, but again, it really is. The thing is, y'all, is that learning to say no is something that in some ways is kind of a gender-based issue, because little boys are traditionally taught in society to be able to say what's on their mind, you know? But girls are really socialized to be agreeable and nice and only say no, you know, if not really even to say no. And we're socialized to make everyone around us happy. And so that can really lead to poor boundaries, and it can lead to being violated and used, taken advantage of in lots of different ways. I think I want to put a little tiny bit of red on here. So learning to say no is something I've had to, actually had to practice, even in situations where it seems like I wouldn't have to. Oh, that doesn't look good. Let me rub that in. I need to do my eyelashes too. In situations where you wouldn't think I would have to practice, but I do. And actually dating has been a good way for me to practice, like, saying no more often. You would not be surprised how many people who don't know you will try to pressure you to talk to them, see them, FaceTime them, send them pictures, all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, we don't even know each other. Like, what is happening right now? Why are you trying to pressure me? So just learning to say no has been really good in those environments. Another one is asking for your needs to be met. A lot of times people with complex PTSD can be very compliant, right? Because you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want your hypervigilance to show. You don't want people to think you're a weirdo. You don't want to ask for too much. You just kind of want to slip into the background. So that's another one, no matter what the environment, especially like work environments, because, you know, work environments will just use the hell out of you regardless. Another one is practicing the pause, which is one great way that I have learned to self-regulate too, is something comes up, something happens, just pause for a minute, take some deep breaths. Deep breathing is something I talk about a lot on this channel, because I really, truly, and firmly believe in the value of learning to breathe deeply. But also, if you have a hard time self-regulating, like I do, if you have complex PTSD, that's going to happen. Another key thing for healing is showing up for yourself. Y'all, this can look like a lot of different things, but I want to give some examples, because there's ways that we can show up for ourselves I think we don't think about. Like, for example, for me, I've talked about this before. Like, I really struggle with messiness. You know, I think it's part of executive dysfunction. It's part of having a mental illness. It's part of maybe having ADHD. It's part of growing up with a schizophrenic mother. So everything was disorganized, you know. So, but I'm a grown woman, you know, so I got to take responsibility for myself and realize this is a way I'm not showing up for myself. When we don't eat healthy, when we just eat junk food and it makes us sick, that's a way we're not showing up for ourselves. It has nothing to do with weight, nothing to do with being fat, nothing to do with honestly how our body looks. But we all know, it's enough science to know that when we eat crappy processed food, that it's not good for us, that we're going to feel bad, and probably gain weight too. But that's a way we're not showing up for ourselves. If we're not showering or bathing, like, that's a way we don't show up for ourselves. If we're not taking care of our teeth, you know, it's just literally everything. It's not just hygiene. I'm bringing up random hygiene stuff, but if we're feeling grief and knowing we need to feel it and drinking it away, or coping with our, whatever your coping mechanism is, that's a way you're not showing up for yourself. Another way that my therapist has said this, which I really appreciate it, is stay in your body. Try to stay in your body as much as possible. So it's literally checking in on yourself. You know how, like, think of it like this, like reparenting. You know how if you're a kid, well, okay, so as a mom, you know, when I had a little baby, like a 3-month or a 6-month-old, whenever we're out, I'm always checking in, you know, with the baby. Like, is he cold? Is he hot? You know, is he hungry? Is he thirsty? Is his sock too tight? Does he need a diaper change? Is he sitting in his own turds? You know, like, reparenting ourselves and showing up for ourselves, being aware of what's in our body, what's going on in our body, is a way that we can look at our current day-to-day circumstances and say, what do I need and how can I show up for myself right now? So yeah, my therapist, really thankful for this. Whenever I would be telling him stories, he'd be like, what were you feeling then? What was happening in your body? You know, were you feel like, literally, were you feeling cold? Was your stomach turning? Did you have a headache? Just be aware of what's going on in your body. And I was like, oh, until I really started doing that all the time, I didn't even know how to show up for myself. This always happens with this mascara. I hate this mascara. It always somehow gets underneath. Even though I've just been sitting here talking and it's somehow already smeared. So yeah, so showing up for yourself is a really, really important way to manage complex PTSD. Figuring out what's going on in your body, y'all, is such a valuable, I would say, out of all of these tips, I would say it's the most valuable thing I've done, is realizing every time I'm in any new scenario, figuring out what's happening in my head, my heart, my, you know, what am I feeling in my body, and actually even kind of taking note of it. Because the thing is that you become more aware of people and circumstances that make you feel uncomfortable. As a result of that, I realized that I was going to really cut back on different things I was watching, because I just started paying attention to what was going on in my body and realizing this is not a way that I can show up for myself, because I just feel like shit when I watch stuff like this. Why would I do that to myself? Like, why? What is the point of putting myself through trauma? And that was because I could tell what was going on in my body. So yeah, and other key ways that I have dealt with healing, that's the end of her suggestions for what to do. But I think those are great suggestions. But another way that I have is by learning and practicing diaphragmatic breathing, which is like doing breath work in counts, like in for 4, hold the breath for 4, then out for 4, and then pause for 4. So I try to do that a little bit every day, but definitely when I'm feeling anxious. If you have complex PTSD and you want like a whole lot of tips, I did do a video, the one I mentioned before, how I healed myself from complex PTSD. And it is up on there, and I have a whole bunch of things that have worked for me in the past. Let's see if I can put this mascara on without it. Okay, so I'm gonna go change my clothes and do my hair and take a picture. It's a much cuter thumbnail. My hair is a mess. I don't even know if I can revive. I don't even know if I can revive this. but I'm going to try to revive it because I don't feel like washing it. Ooh, it's messy. We'll see. Anyway, thank you so much for this, for coming to my little Complex PTSD chat. This is not the final look, y'all. Don't worry. Anyway, talk to y'all later. Bye.